Hey there, and welcome back to our YouTube channel. My name is Ariana. I'm part of a DID system. On this channel, we talk about dissociative identity disorder and borderline personality disorder. I've only got about 20 minutes to film this, so let's get into it. Psychology Today is sometimes a problematic website. It's kind of like a blog site where a bunch of people can come and write about psychology and psychiatry topics. I'm not really sure what their vetting process is, if there is one. But what we're talking about today, I just want to say, is not the first time Psych Today has messed up. They've written articles that are very stigmatizing of mental disorders before. They've hosted articles that give misinformation and that villainize personality disorders. And today they've messed up yet again with this just inspired piece of writing about dissociative identity disorder. Now I'm going to be looking down at this laptop here because Shell's the one that scripted this, so her notes are on the laptop, and I'm also going to be reading the article. So the title of this article is "The Debate Over Whether Dissociative Identity Disorder is Real," and this is written by Joe Pierre, MD. In psychiatry, there's no more controversial diagnosis than dissociative identity disorder, the disorder formerly known as multiple personality disorder. First appearing in the third edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, published in 1980. This was the DSM-3. Proponents of the disorder have claimed that DID is woefully underdiagnosed. It is, especially among those with a history of sexual trauma, with a true prevalence upwards of 20% across inpatient and outpatient psychiatric settings. But others have suggested that DID is by definition overdiagnosed because they claim it isn't a real disorder. These people are idiots. Instead, they argue, it's a diagnosis manufactured by those claiming to have it based on a blueprint established in Hollywood with the based on a true story films The Three Faces of Eve in 1957 and Sybil in 1976. I would like to go on record as saying that no one in our system has ever seen these films, so we certainly didn't base our experience on them. A related charge is that DID is largely iatrogenic. That is a product of a small handful of self-proclaimed experts that have managed to sell the disorder to psychotherapists and their patients, similar to how hysteria based on false memories of ritual satanic abuse in children sprang up in the 1980s and later faded. Okay, so a bit on this. We know that there were therapists in the 90s that encouraged a DID diagnosis in their patients, even when evidence suggested that the diagnosis was not DID. That trend certainly didn't help the field. However, I would argue that that was not the case for the majority of cases. Additionally, the prevalence of ritualistic abuse has not been fully established. Was there a satanic panic? Yes. Does that mean that ritual abuse doesn't exist? No. And by the way, ritualistic abuse does not have to be satanic in nature. Let's just get that out of the way. So he continues, why is there so much disagreement over this controversial entity? The main point of contention is that while we're all familiar with dissociation, the idea that we can have out-of-body experiences in the face of trauma like sexual assault or can zone out, seemingly unconscious of our surroundings while driving on the freeway, he's saying that these are experiences that people can relate to. It's more difficult to fathom the kind of extreme dissociation that's a defining feature of DID. Yeah, imagine living with it. Indeed, it can seem incredible to those who have never seen or experienced DID that one's identity and sense of self can fragment into two or more, or even dozens of distinct personalities or alters with different names, genders, ages, and recollected pasts, each potentially unaware of the other. Two or more, or even dozens? Wait till this guy hears about polyfragmented systems. After all, we might ask ourselves, if multiple personalities go by different names, who is it that gives them those names? Just as there's only one logical answer to that question, skeptics likewise claim that the other characteristics of alters must likewise be manufactured by the individual who purportedly has DID. This is fallacious reasoning. Listen, I don't even know how everybody in the system came up with their names. What we do know is that most of us chose our own names, but we didn't choose to exist. You can blame our abusers for that. Thanks. A socio-cognitive perspective. Sounds great. How then can we best understand the undeniable fact that some people do present with the symptoms of DID? I don't know, maybe that it's a real disorder that you should take seriously. There's no doubt that such people exist. Thanks. But in what sense do their dissociative identities exist? And if they don't, does that mean that those who manifest them are faking it? University of Wisconsin psychiatrist Dr. Charles Rison, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but who is this person? His blurb on the University of Wisconsin website reads, "Development of novel treatments for major depressive disorder and understanding mechanisms of action for those interventions." In fact, his specialty is the treatment of major depressive disorder, so you know, a real expert in dissociative disorders. So he offers an answer that reflects on how many psychiatrists think of DID. And this is quoted. "There is no doubt that some people behave as if they have multiple personalities, and not all of them have been to therapists who have trained them to interpret their dissociative experiences in this way. Does this mean that dissociative identity disorder exists? In my opinion, it depends on what we mean by exists." What? Yes, dissociative identity disorder exists if by exists we mean there are people who complain of its symptoms and suffer its consequences. What do you mean by exists? Do I think that some people have many biologically distinct entities packed into their heads? No. All right, so there's proof that there is. Neurological mapping has proven that distinct identities activate different parts of the brain. People who pretended to switch to a different personality did not show the same results as people with DID who were actually switching. So you're just plain wrong, sir. You're wrong. I think that some people dissociate so badly that either on their own or as a result of therapeutic experiences, it becomes the case that the most convincing way for them to see their own experience is as if it is happening to multiple people. I feel like this is splitting hairs. Are they different people, or do they believe that they're different people? I don't know. Are you a smart man, or do you believe that you're a smart man? In 1994, the same year that DSM-4 replaced the term multiple personality in NPD with dissociative identity in DID, Carleton University psychologist Nicholas Spanos published an influential paper that similarly characterized MPD through a sociocultural perspective. In short, the sociocognitive perspective suggests that patients learn to construe themselves as possessing multiple selves, learn to present themselves in terms of this construal, and learn to reorganize and elaborate on their personal biography so as to make it congruent with their understanding of what it means to be a multiple. Okay, so I will agree that these separate identities do learn how to view ourselves through a sociocultural lens. But the thing is that everybody does that. That's what it means to live in a society. That's how you develop within a culture. Spanos chose the word enactment to describe how people identifying as having DID follow rule-governed social constructions with multiple identities that are established, legitimated, maintained, and altered through social interaction. People with DID, he wrote, are actively involved in using available information to create a social impression that is congruent with their perception of situational demands and with the interpersonal goals they are attempting to achieve. This is literally being human. This is how people acclimate to a culture. So a brief overview on this Spanos guy. His main focus was to usurp the way hypnosis was commonly viewed. He did over 200 experiments or research on hypnosis as a practice. He did do some studies on DID. His overall argument was that people can't actually be hypnotized. They can act as if they are. He also believed that DID was an attention-seeking behavior that was then reinforced by hypnosis therapy. I would like to be clear that nobody in our system has ever been through hypnosis. We think it's creepy. We think it's terrifying. We have no interest in it. So Spanos, if you could please tell us how our DID formed when we've never been under hypnosis, love to hear it. So the article continues. While there are many psychiatrists and psychologists who agree that DID is socio-culturally constructed, as Spanos argues, so basically that DID is created based on social norms and structures, there are many others, often including clinicians who work with DID and researchers who study it, who dispute the socio-cognitive account in favor of a trauma model. So you're telling me that the people who have actual expertise on dissociative identity disorder have identified that it is caused by trauma. You mean the people who actually study DID don't believe patients construct these identities themselves. What even is the point of this article? You're putting arguments between people who have actually studied the disorder, between somebody who specializes in mood disorders. And by the way, the writer of this article specializes in mood disorders and schizophrenia. So why are you trying to argue against the people who have actual expertise in this field? Like, why did you write this article, sir? Within this seemingly two-sided debate, there are several legitimate and meaningful points of contention. No, there's points of contention, whether they're meaningful or legitimate, I would argue that. Such as to what extent DID is really iatrogenic or how to best treat it, whose resolution is thwarted when the debate is reduced to arguments about whether DID is real or fake. In fact, the sociocultural model and the trauma model aren't actually mutually exclusive, according to a unifying biopsychosocial model. And DID can be both a trauma reaction as well as highly shaped by sociocultural factors and may share some potential overlap. So what you're saying is that it's possible that DID is caused by trauma, but that the way it presents it's shaped by the experiences of the person with DID? Mind blown. Who is this genius? Now he goes on to talk about enacted identities, which I have a problem with that term anyway, because despite what he goes on to say as a descriptor for enacted identities, it does automatically present it as if people have created these identities and are acting out. Within the sociocognitive model, enactment does not mean the same thing as fabrication or faking it, which suggests more of a conscious and deliberate act of deception. If, as Spanos suggests, we instead think of DID as similar to other phenomena, including hypnotic suggestion, past life regression, spirit or demonic possession, to which I would add speaking in tongues, alien abduction experiences, or having imaginary friends as children, we can better appreciate how the enactment of multiple identities might arise consciously, unconsciously, or semi-consciously within the bounds of a certain sociocultural framework. So this is just a conspiracy theory. This is basically someone who doesn't believe in anything that they can't understand. If you're going to throw in an actual diagnosable disorder that has been in the DSM for decades, and you're going to pin it against other experiences that science has not been able to come up with an explanation for, you're basically just saying your mind cannot comprehend the things that you have not experienced for yourself. In other words, while asking whether DID exists or not and whether those with DID are faking it or not implies only two possible answers, the reality is something more nuanced and complex. For example, when people are possessed by a demon or the Holy Spirit during a culturally sanctioned trance ritual or describe past lives during psychotherapy, they're not simply making it up for the sake of making it up for attention. While that could be the case, for example, it is possible to simulate or malinger DID, just as the woman upon which the movie Sybil was based later admitted to lying about her alters. Yes, some people do fake this disorder, just as some people will fake any disorder. The malingering rate in DID is no more than any other psychological disorder. So the malingering is not unique to DID. He continues with enacting demonic possession, like enacting DID, instead suggests an experience that involves tapping into something within one's psyche that draws upon an existing sociocultural framework, such as a religious practice, seance, psychotherapy session, or something else. I'd like to just point out at this time that the DSM very clearly states that DID cannot be diagnosed if the experience is part of an accepted cultural practice. So the examples he uses as in being possessed by the Holy Spirit or past life regression, these are not things that would be even within the same framework of DID because they are part of religious cultural practices, which the DSM is saying this is something that exists outside of those practices. While none of these examples of cultural ritual imply that anyone is faking it or merely acting, the socio-cognitive model does make clear that demons, past lives, or distinct personalities don't really exist apart from being enactments or creations of one's mind. I would like this author to give a definition of what he means when he says faking it, because saying that something is a creation of your mind is essentially telling somebody that it's not real. So if fake does not mean not real, what does it mean? I would have loved for him to have given us his definition for that. This perspective isn't actually very far afield from that of psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Richard Kluft, one of the leading proponents of the trauma model and legitimacy of DID as real. Yes, real is in quotation marks. Your bias is showing, sir. Your bias is showing. For example, Kluft characterizes the personalities or identities of DID as behaviorally enacted with noteworthy role-taking and role-playing dimensions and sensitive to intrapsychic, interpersonal, and environmental stimuli. The personalities are not unconscious in the traditional psychoanalytic sense and arise as desperate coping strategies in an overwhelmed child that initially have an adaptational and defensive design. The patient forms and auto-hypnotically envisions an illusory embodiment of an identity that could manage the adaptation that is best believed to be required. What is envisioned with a great sense of reality is believed to be real, and the mind undergoes a cognitive restructuring that accepts and interprets what is believed to be real as real and makes it possible to act as if it were real. I feel like I just read an entire circle. So it is that both Spanos and Kluft use the term enacted to account for the multiple identities of DID. The devil of what exactly that means, that is, why and by what mechanism those enactments occur, is in the details, with variability between models as to whether or to what extent such enactments are best understood as volitional fantasies or unconscious creations, and whether or to what extent they're causally linked to trauma. In addition to conceding overlap, another way to resolve these differences is to acknowledge that such diversity not only reflects variations from one model to another. That is exactly what it says. It says from model to another. Who edited this article? But also from one culture, social setting, or individual to another. For those with DID, the term enactment will no doubt resonate with some better than others. Who is this resonating with? Did you interview anyone who actually has DID, or you didn't bother because you decided before even researching this article that DID isn't real? I want to know of your sample, what size of your sample was able to relate to the term enactment? He then goes on to write a preview of his next article, which we're not going to get into right now. Look, I'm not a professional by any means. However, both our undergrad and graduate degrees were very research heavy. This is just a bad article. It's a very long way of saying a whole lot of nothing. His conclusion suggests that the point of this article was to show how opposing sides of an argument are saying the same thing, and I don't think he achieved that. And if that's not the point of the article, then he didn't do a great job of structuring the article. He also doesn't seem to have bothered to look at research that has physical evidence that his opinion is just wrong. He doesn't mention the neuromapping that has shown that the brain activity of people with DID differs from those without DID. I'll be honest, I have not had a chance to look over his sources. Doing so would have greatly prolonged the video actually coming out, and we wanted to be able to react to this as it has just been brought to our attention. We will be reviewing these sources eventually and taking a critical look at them to see whether he accurately sourced those articles. We want to see if the conclusions that he drew from them are what the articles were actually saying, or if he was handpicking quotes that sounded good. I'm willing to bet that he cherry-picked articles that would already support his hypothesis. And in good research, you want to look at sources that don't support your hypothesis, because that is how you are able to then prove your point, because you prove those articles wrong, which has not been done in this article. Here's the problem we're always going to run into with DID research. First off, there's just not enough. There's not enough research. We need studies that not only make new discoveries, but also duplicate those studies. That's how science works. We also run into the problem that the actual experiences of people with DID vary greatly, because it's a disorder that is formed as a defense, and that defense is going to be very specific to the threat that they have been through. As for whether DID is real, well, it's obvious where we stand. The science suggests that it is real, but I don't think any amount of science is going to convince people who don't want to believe that DID is real. It's hard for some people to believe in concepts they don't understand. And what I think is probably more the case, people don't want to believe that the type of abuse that causes DID is as prevalent as it is. Of one thing I am sure, you cannot prove that something doesn't exist. You can only say that there's no evidence to support something's existence. And there is plenty of evidence to show that DID is real. So until next time, take care and stay well.